Hey, Redeemer family. Coming at you with another pastoral quick take. Hoping to encourage us all as we start to look toward this little light at the end of the tunnel we think that we can see, of the ability to start gathering together for corporate worship, for other fellowship times, edification. And as more and more information starts to come out about what we may be able to do, we want, as your pastoral team at Redeemer, to be encouraging you on how you should think and how you should act and how you should speak as we start moving towards doing this again. And here's why. Because for a lot of us, we don't totally agree on how this should be rolled out. Some of us think we should take longer. Some of us think we should have been doing this already. Some of us think this whole COVID-19 thing has been blown out of proportion. Others of us have been hit personally by things that have happened. And so it's important for us to be united and to be loving as we move towards what it will look like for us to begin to regather. So I'd like to draw your attention to the words of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 4. Paul's been writing to the Ephesians regarding their salvation and the fact that they are united together as a church. And when he comes to chapter 4, and if you have an ESV, you actually might see a little heading over this passage called The New Life, where Paul talks about how these Christians should live now that they've been saved. And so no longer should they be sensual and calloused and unkind and thinking with futility, but they should put on the new self and put away falsehood and put away lustful thoughts and actions. But in verse 29, the Apostle Paul says, to this group of Christians, this local church, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Really powerful words in a bigger section that is worth taking as a whole. But let's just pull that out for a second and examine it. Paul says that there should be no corrupt talking. No communication that is corrupt. Well, what would corrupting talk be? What would it look like? You think of how sometimes on the computer you might get a notification as you're trying to access something. It might say something like, this file is corrupt and cannot be opened or accessed. It's damaged. It's not working properly. And so corrupting talk would be that which tears down rather than builds up. That which would be destructive. Speech or even perhaps messages electronically that would compromise the strength of the body, the unity of the body. Paul says there should be none of that. No corrupting talk. Nothing that's going to make the body not work properly. In fact, just a few verses before, in verse 16, Paul talks about how the Ephesian believers need to remember the unity that they're called to and that they should help each other grow together. And at the end of verse 16, he talks about how the body should have each part working properly. And then the whole body growing so that it builds itself up in love. The opposite of that comes from corrupting talk. So Paul says none of that, but rather, what? Only such as is good for building up, which fits the theme of several verses in this letter where Paul exhorts these Ephesians to be united and to build each other up. This idea of strengthening, of making the body better, stronger, more united, better at doing what it's called to do, which is to minister together the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world, to each other. And so no corrupting talk, nothing that tears down or compromises the strength, the integrity of the body, but rather talk that builds up, that strengthens, that helps the body move towards growing and building itself up in love. He goes on in verse 29 and says that this talk that is for building up should be done as fits the occasion. In other words, appropriate speech may include the need for varying things at varying times. Sometimes there may need to be a warning, a correction, a rebuke. But there's a time and a place and a manner in which that is fitting, appropriate. The time may also be for someone that a word of comfort, a word of gentleness, a word of patience and grace and mercy is needed based on the occasion. And so talk that builds up has in mind the fact that the occasion needs to fit the words. Or perhaps I should say that the other way. The words should fit the occasion. But then the goal of all of this at the end of verse 29 says that it may give grace to those who hear. That's the goal. Grace. The goal is not to be right. The goal is not to win an argument. The goal is not to zing someone and show them how wrong they were. No, the goal is gospel hope, encouragement in Christ, love, the strengthening of faith, the ministry of the gospel through Christ that his people dole out, if you will, because of the ministry of Christ that he performed for them. And so, brothers and sisters, as we are now into this sort of transitionary season, we are looking as a church at hopefully in the next handful of weeks being able to gather together again. And there will be some form of disagreement among some of us. It's just the way it's going to be. And by the way, that's not just the case with our church. Christians are dealing with how to agree and disagree lovingly and carefully in this time. So let's heed these words of the Apostle Paul. Let's have no corrupting talk that tears down or destroys, but let's have talk that is good for building up, that's appropriate for the occasion, and that gives grace to those who hear.